I want to talk to you about the Amy Coney Barrett nomination, actually confirmation today, and also about the election. Many of you have written, many of you are concerned about what is happening, and I don't blame you. I join your concern. Many of you have referred to the hypocrisy of the Republicans, Mitch McConnell in particular, putting up Amy Coney Barrett after letting Barack Obama's nominee of Merrick Garland just stay there for 10 months without even a hearing. What you may not remember is that Merrick Garland was picked by Barack Obama as a moderate, as somebody who would be available and somebody who would be acceptable to Republicans. Amy Coney Barrett is not a moderate by any stretch of the imagination. She is, as she has called herself, not only a strict constructionist, but a literalist. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But I want to just describe to you the degree to which this confirmation vote, which is, again, barring a miracle, it's going to happen today, is a travesty of democracy. 5 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices, if she is confirmed, 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices will have been voted on, confirmed by senators who represent 15 million fewer Americans than the senators on the other side of the aisle. That is, Republicans today, Republicans in the majority represent 15 fewer Americans than the Democrats in the Senate. We're also going to have a situation where 5 of the Supreme Court justices were nominated by presidents who lost the popular vote. Now put those two together. Presidents who lost the popular vote and the fact that you've got a majority in the Senate that actually represents a dwindling minority of Americans. And you have somebody who is put there into the Supreme Court who is not a moderate, not designed to appeal to even the middle or anything close to the middle, but is very, very far on the right. And the fact, just to lay it all out here, that this will make a sixth conservative on the Supreme Court, a 6th right-winger on the Supreme Court. These are not just moderates. These are not people like I remember used to be put on by Republican presidents and Republican and Democratic senators. No, these are people who are very, very far from the mainstream, very far from what we would consider to be moderates. And yet they will have the power, this 6-9 majority will have the power to overrule laws and have the power to declare that those laws are unconstitutional. Now, once the Supreme Court declares a law unconstitutional, that is the end of it. Congress cannot remake the law and remedy whatever was found to be wrong with the law, because the lack of constitutionality itself makes that effort impossible. And you see, the issues in front of this Supreme Court are not just Roe versus Wade and a woman's right over her own body, but also the Affordable Care Act, also the Marriage Equality Act, also everything else that a President Biden might want to do. Whether we're talking about issues of the environment. Amy Coney Barrett said in her brief confirmation hearing that she would not even take a stand on the environment. She said it was too controversial. It was a controversial issue. She didn't want to take a stand on it. Well, as you know, there's no controversy about climate change. I'm sitting in a place right now where I can see smoke in the air. Many of you have had a direct experience of climate change this year and last year. So we have a court starting this week that will not reflect the values of Americans, that is put in place by a minority, that is put in place by presidents who were not even voted into office by the popular vote, we are seeing a devastation, really a devastating response to a democracy that was already flawed. But what we have left of our democracy is really seriously encumbered by this confirmation. So what do we do about it? What's the answer? People ask me all the time, is this just the end of the road for democracy? No, of course not. What President Biden, and I think there will be a President Biden, we'll get to that in a moment, but what President Biden can do is expand the number of Supreme Court justices. Now, before you say no, or before you throw up your hands and say that doesn't work, or that won't work, or that's too radical, let me just explain to you that the Supreme Court does not have in the Constitution a particular size. The Constitution is silent on the size of the Supreme Court. The court originally was 5 justices. Under John Adams, it was 5 justices. It gradually increased in number up to 10 justices under Abraham Lincoln. In that first 80 years of the Supreme Court, it went up and down in number. There's absolutely no reason why the court has to be limited to 9 justices. In the name of just balancing the court, making sure that the court is responsive generally to the will of the majority, it seems critically important to expand the size of the court. Now, some people say Franklin D. Roosevelt tried that in 1937 with his court packing scheme, and it failed. Well, that's a misreading of history. It did not fail. He did not get it through Congress, that is true, but the mere fact that he had that proposal changed the Supreme Court. There's a great deal of evidence that immediately upon the announcement of his effort to expand the size of the court changed its ways. It began affirming the constitutionality of New Deal legislation. Well, on that basis, it seems to me a very strong argument can be made that, assuming there is a President Biden, one of the first things on his agenda ought to be to expand the size of the Supreme Court. If there is a majority of Democrats in the Senate, that majority should go along with expanding the size of the Supreme Court. This is absolutely urgent if our democracy is to mean anything. If there is going to be any possibility of a Biden agenda or a Democratic agenda, but beyond partisan politics, even in terms of what the majority of Americans want and need, this is going to be critical. Amy Coney Barrett's nomination and confirmation make a mockery of our democracy. Now, there are only 8 days until Election Day. Many of you are justifiably and appropriately worried and anxious. The polls are very good. But you remember, I'm sure, 4 years ago when the polls also looked very good for Hillary Clinton. In fact, the New York Times just 4 years ago, yesterday, gave Hillary Clinton an 86% probability of winning the election. There is no room or cause for complacency. It is critically important that you vote. Donald Trump himself, and I don't need to remind you, poses a clear and present danger to our democracy. Now, don't expect the results right away next Tuesday. A lot of people say, well, we're going to know. They treat this as a normal election. No, there are so many absentee ballots. In fact, the latest information I have is that 61 million Americans have already voted absentee. 4 years ago, 58 million for the entire pre-election voted absentee. We still have 8 days to go. So we're going to have a huge absentee ballot. It takes time to count those absentee ballots. We're probably not going to know. I would say It's very, very doubtful. We're going to know next Tuesday night. We may not even know by Wednesday night. And on top of that, I think it's very likely that Donald Trump is going to try to contest a number of those ballots and a number of those state results. I think he would like to have a contested election. He'd like to have this on January 3rd. If he loses the popular vote, as I believe he will, and even loses the Electoral College vote, I think he would like to have this move into the House of Representatives on January 3rd. We've got to do everything we can to make this a landslide so he doesn't have the opportunity, so that there is no question that he lost, even in, and especially in these swing states. And then I want to make sure you are fully cognizant and you are with me on this, because that's not the end. Simply having Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House is not the end of the story. In fact, it's the beginning of our fight in many ways. And I speak to you as somebody who spent a lot of time and has spent a lot of time fighting with neoliberals and people who are Democrats, but they are from Wall Street and big corporations, and they may be very good and well-intended people, but they have a very different conception of what this nation needs than many of you do. If we're going to get Medicare for all and a Green New Deal and a wealth tax and a lot of other things that are necessary, if we're going to fight systemic racism, if we're going to actually have a reversal of climate change, or at least get on the road to reversing climate change, if we're going to have big money out of politics and a democracy that's working for all of us, then we can't simply sit back and assume any of that is going to happen. No, even with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House, even with the House and the Senate in the hands of the Democrats, no, it's going to require a huge amount of organizing and mobilizing and energizing on your parts to make sure that this happens. This is a long term, and it is a tenacious fight. I want to just also make sure that you understand that after the win, and let's hope it is a win for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, there's going to be at least 40% of Americans who are going to have a hard time accepting that. Donald Trump has divided this nation as no president has divided the nation. Now, the nation was already divided. What he did is he poured salt into our old wounds of racism and xenophobia and misogyny. Like no president before him, he's understood how to pour salt into those wounds and how to make us angry, how to make us distrustful, how to divide this nation in ways it hasn't been divided. The last time I remember this degree of anger and division was during the Vietnam War. And before that, maybe the Civil Rights Movement, but those were issues that people really had different positions on. This anger, this suspicion, this paranoia, this fear that so many Americans have right now toward other Americans on the other side has been really a project of Donald Trump and maybe Vladimir Putin, and there's several others that would like to foster this degree of division. In fact, you might say that political divisiveness is a strategy to keep the majority of Americans from unifying to do a lot of the things that we need to do. The oligarchy in America that is wealthier than ever, as you may know, America's billionaires are 30% wealthier than they were in March of this year. Well, what would they like? They don't want us to come together. In fact, for them, divisiveness is a very important political strategy, because divisiveness means that we won't come together to demand the things that we need. No, we'll just spend our time blaming others. It's vitally important that we hold out the promise and also the expectation and work toward a multi-class, multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition to make our democracy work for everybody and also to make this economy work for everybody. The richest economy in the world, what has happened? For 45 years, the median wage has not increased. For 45 years, the bottom half of America has not had an increase in their wages adjusted for inflation. For 45 years, most of the benefits of economic growth have gone to the very top. Racism and divisiveness has helped the top deflect attention from what has actually occurred. Now, let me say finally, to those of you who are anxious or despairing, and believe me, I understand. I woke up this morning, as I wake up very many mornings, worried about the election, worried about the country, worried about COVID that has now claimed 225,000 American lives. I woke up and I said to myself, as I often have to say to myself these days, look, there's no point in being anxious or despairing, because that's not going to help. I understand if you feel that way. There's plenty to be anxious and despairing about. I don't remember the nation in as bad shape as we are now in. And the possibility that Donald Trump could be reelected next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, is shattering. That's why it is so important, if you have not voted yet, that you do vote. That's why it's so important that you get everybody you know to vote, everybody in your family to vote. That's why it's so important that if there is any degree of intimidation, if you go to the polls and you actually feel some intimidation, use the voter hotline. It's 866-OUR-VOTE. 866-OUR-VOTE. That's the election protection hotline. It's been set up so that you can report any signs of voter intimidation. And that is a possibility. Let's be realistic about it. That is a possibility. But we are now being tested as we have not been tested probably since the Second World War in terms of the capacity of this nation to rise to the occasion. The national nightmare that we are experiencing, the coronavirus taking this many lives, climate change destroying so much, racial animosity, police abuse, systemic racism, and then obviously Donald Trump's tactics, his divisiveness, his authoritarianism. It's enough to make anybody despair and make anyone anxious. But let's join together. Let's understand that the great arc of history does bend toward justice, as Martin Luther King Jr. once said. Let's make the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett something that is an incident, but is only a step that is not going to condemn us to a Supreme Court that is itself authoritarian and right-wing, but we will have an expanded court. We'll get rid of the filibuster in the Senate as well. We might even make Washington, D.C. a state. There's so many things that can be done and should be done. if Joe Biden is president and if the Democrats get back both houses of Congress, the Voting Rights Act. Well, I wish I could be more inspiring and uplifting, but I do want you to know how important the next week and the next months and the next year or two are going to be. You need to be an activist, even more of an activist than you've already been. Thank you for everything you are doing. Thank you for trying to be a progressive activist. Thank you for, even in the darkest of times, pitching in. That is the essence of patriotism.